Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're stripping away the legal jargon to look at a fundamental concept in business law. We're going to break down the absolutely crucial difference between actually buying something and merely agreeing to buy it. I know, it sounds super simple, right? But as we'll see from the study material, the law treats these two situations completely differently.
Imagine you're out buying a car. You might think, hey, a purchase is just a purchase. But actually, the specific way you structure that transaction drastically changes who holds the financial risk and what your legal rights actually are. It comes down to this. Are you instantly the owner, or are you just holding on to a promise for the future?
All right, let's dive right in. If we look at Section 4, subsection 1 of the Sale of Goods Act, the law defines a contract of sale as a really broad, generic umbrella term. It's officially defined as a contract where the seller either transfers or agrees to transfer the ownership of goods to a buyer for a decided price. Notice those two distinct parts there? Transferring right now versus agreeing to transfer later? That means the single umbrella term actually covers two completely distinct types of transactions. Let's break down the first one.
The first transaction type under this umbrella is simply called a sale. In a sale, the title and absolute ownership of the goods transfer immediately from the seller to the buyer. Think of the most straightforward purchase you can make. You walk into a dealership, pay cash at the showroom, and immediately drive away with a new car. The literal second you hand over the money and they give you the keys, the property and those goods is yours. Done deal.
Now, the second type is an agreement to sell. And here, the title of the goods doesn't transfer right away. Instead, it transfers at a future date, usually once certain conditions are fulfilled. To use our car example again, imagine booking a customized car. It hasn't even been built yet, and it won't be delivered for, say, another 3 months. You have an agreement, sure, but you are not the owner of a physical car quite yet.
Head-to-head comparison. How the law treats your purchase.
Okay, so the law actually classifies the status of the contract itself differently based on timing. A sale is known as an executed contract. Basically, that means it's done and dusted. Both parties have fulfilled their current obligations. The seller handed over the goods, the buyer handed over the cash. On the flip side, an agreement to sell is an executory contract. Executory is just a fancy way of saying the heavy lifting, like the actual transfer of ownership and usually the payment, well, that's still pending for the future. Let's translate some of that Latin legal jargon from our study notes, because this is pretty interesting. A sale creates what is called a right in rem. In plain English, this gives you absolute ownership rights against the whole world. If someone tries to take your new car, you have the legal right to defend your ownership against literally anyone on earth. An agreement to sell, however, only creates a right in personam. This means you only have a personal right against that specific individual seller. You don't actually own the car yet, you just own the right to hold that specific dealership accountable to their promise. And this brings us to exactly why knowing the difference matters so much in the real world. We're talking about the risk of loss. In a sale, because ownership has transferred to you, the risk falls entirely on your shoulders as the buyer. If you buy that showroom car, leave it in the lot for an hour, and a tree falls on it, yeah, that financial loss is entirely yours. But if you have an agreement to sell for that customized car and the factory burns down before delivery, the financial risk remains entirely with the seller because they still hold the title.
So what happens when things go sideways and someone breaches the contract? Let's say you, the buyer, decide to back out. In a completed sale, because you already legally own those goods, the seller can sue you for the full promised price. However, in an agreement to sell, if you break your promise to buy that custom car in the future, the seller cannot sue you for the price of the car. Why? Because the car isn't legally yours. They can only sue you for the damages or financial losses caused by your broken promise.
This distinction also dictates what the seller is legally allowed to do with the physical goods. Because ownership immediately transfers in a sale, the seller absolutely cannot resell your car to someone else. It's yours, no way around it. But in an agreement to sell, since the seller technically still owns that customized car right up until delivery, they could theoretically turn around and resell it to a third party. Now, doing that would definitely breach your contract, and you could absolutely sue them for damages, but that third-party buyer would actually get a valid legal title to the car. Crazy, right? So, bringing this all together, the textbook distinction perfectly summarizes this side-by-side comparison. You can see exactly how the nature of the contract, the transfer of property, the legal rights created, and the consequences of a breach, they literally all hinge entirely on whether ownership transfers immediately or at a future date. It's a massive difference.
And to wrap this up with one final, super practical difference from our notes, taxes. Because the transfer of property happens immediately in a sale, it instantly becomes liable for sales tax.
Conversely, an agreement to sell is not liable for sales tax at the time the agreement is made. That tax is avoided entirely until those future conditions are met and the actual sale finally takes place.
So now that you know the legal risks, the rights, and even the tax implications tied to exactly when ownership transfers, I want you to think about this in your own life. Think back to your last major purchase. Was it truly a sale, where ownership transferred immediately, or were there conditions and future dates involved, making it just an executory agreement to sell? Understanding this one simple distinction really empowers you to know exactly where you stand before you ever sign on the dotted line. Thanks for joining me for this explainer, and remember to always look closely at the details of your deals.